Hey chairmakers, I'm George Sawyer. We're in the Lucian Avery shop here. Had a lot of questions about how to tune up your inshaves, so I thought we'd come around to the toolmaker himself and see how he does it. We're in his shop in Hardwick, Vermont, which is just a few miles up the road from where we are. Have a look around the shop and then we'll get into sharpening. This is Lucian himself.
All right, so I'm going to go over how to sharpen inshaves, and I'm going to show how to sharpen it by hand. Lots of times it's tempting to go to a machine right away, and I recommend that you do it by hand if you can. If you get a huge nick or something, you might need to go to a machine, but often what I found is that they're a little bit tricky to sharpen on a machine because they're even more easy to take the temper out than a lot of other tools. So the general procedure for sharpening an inshave is just like you would any other tool, and you can use the same sharpening equipment you do normally for other tools if that works for you. But what I'm using is usually if the inshave is just dull and doesn't have big nicks in it, I'll start with 200 or 300 grit. This is 300 grit, and then I'll go to 400 grit. And so on the first grit, the 200 or 300, that's where you're going to get your burr. And then the successive grits are just to take the scratches out from there. So you can use any abrasive that you're comfortable with to do this. What I'm using is called file board, which is basically it's an abrasive with a sticky back, and then I just put it on an 1/8 inch thick piece of steel. So that's what I normally use. You can also use diamond stones or whatever. This file board is a little bit hard to get, and also it doesn't come in high high numbers, fine grits. So you can also just use wet and dry sandpaper that you fold around, and I'll actually use that for the higher grits later. 800, and then I'll use 1200 or 1500, whichever I can get, whatever I have in the shop at the time. And then that is all just polishing up the scratches from the first grit. And then what I'll do is I'll use a leather strop with a white gold honing compound on it to take off the burr and to polish it up a little more. What I do is I clamp it in a vise right here. I tilt it down a little bit. I'll start with 200 or 300 grit. This is 300 grit. Yeah, so one thing that's really important is to get it adjusted with some kind of light source so that you can see the scratches as you're abrading the surface. You can see the scratches that you're making, so that you can that'll help keep your bevel flat, because you can see exactly where you're abrading. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I would recommend that you don't do any abrading on the inside, that you do all of your abrading on the outside, all your sharpening on the outside, and then eventually you'll strop the inside. But the inside is really hard to deal with because it's curved, unless you have some specialized tools. So I recommend that you do all the sharpening from the outside. So when I go to the higher grits, I can't get the higher grits in the abrasive that I use for the lower grits, so I go to the wet and dry sandpaper. And what I often do is I'll actually put it on a leather back, kind of like a strop like this. And that way it's easier to cover the whole edge. So this is 800 grit. I went from 400 to 800. Then I'll go to 1500. And I just usually go to 1500. If you're going to put it on Instagram, not really shiny, you could go to higher grits. I'm not sure it's entirely necessary for use. And so now I go to a strop. So for some reason strops don't work very well and they have the black on them from previous use. So I scrape that off. And then I just use this white gold honing compound, but I'm sure there are many different kinds that work, whatever kind you use for all your other tools, which is fine. So this strop, you'll notice, has a flat section and then it has a curved section. And I use that, I make a lot of curved tools, so that helps to hone the inside of the curve. So what I would do, this actually has a little bit of maybe resin on it from use, but I think it'll be fine. So you have your, you've created your burr on the inside, so you take your strop and work that inside all the way down, and then flip it over, put it in the vise. And then you just go back and forth until your burr is completely off, and then you go just a little bit more, sharpen it up, just like you would with any other tool. So one thing I did want to show, I know some people don't have a vise. I think it's really handy if you have a workshop. I don't know how I'd get by without a vise. But one thing that you can do is you can hold it down like this. And it's not as good because it's more likely to wiggle and it's harder to control. But if that's what you have, then go for it. So let's talk about just testing your sharpening if you don't have a piece that you're working on right at the moment, but you want to make sure your tool is sharp. I just take a piece of softwood like this, and I just cut down. So it's not really a direct end grain cut, but sort of 45-degree angle or something like that. Oh, and my blade is not actually has a nick in it, so that is a sign of a nick right there. So if you do see if you sharpen your tool and you do this test that I showed and you see that nick, it doesn't really mean that the tool is dull. It just means it has a nick in it. The rest of the blade might be fine. So you can just use it like that, and especially because you're probably going to go over your chair seat with another tool afterwards anyway, so it's not your final finish. So when I send stuff out of the shop, I make sure it doesn't have nicks in it. But when you're using it in your shop, if it's working fine, don't worry about it. So the other thing is that it's good to just keep honing your tool. So you're using it, you feel like maybe it's getting a little more muscle to pull it through the wood. Just hone it again. Just take your strop and run it over it quickly. When it feels like the strop isn't doing the job, that's when you need to jump down to 200 or 300 grit and work your way back up again. And as you can see, it's easy to do. And so just run through it, get it sharp, and you'll be happy you did.